I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. Welcome to today's episode of Leadovation, Reimagine, Facilitate, Flourish, where today we dive deep into the intersection of personal growth, leadership, and family dynamics. My guest today, Tiffany Sauder, brings a refreshing and honest perspective on the challenge that so many of us face, balancing a thriving professional life with the demands of a growing family, all while trying to have a sense of personal well-being. I recently had a coaching session with a highly successful professional who seemed to have it all, fulfilling work, making a real difference in the world, yet she was overwhelmed and stressed by a lack of work-life balance. This is not an uncommon scenario, and it brought me to a central question. How do we set intentions, create rituals, and manage our lives so that we can be our best selves even in every aspect of life? In today's episode, Tiffany shares her own journey of scaling her business while raising 4 children and supporting her husband's demanding career. Through trial and error, she developed a framework she calls the balanced life of a system that helps her manage the demands of career, family, and self without falling into the trap of burnout or unfulfillment. In this conversation, we explore the concept of unbalanced characters, those roles we sometimes fall into when we're out of sync with our own principles and priorities. Whether you're a grumpy servant, a lonely achiever, or a fearful loyalist, Tiffany has real actionable advice on how to recognize these patterns and, of course, do some sort of course correction. We'll also dive into practical solutions such as setting life minimums and creating systems to manage the mundane so that you can focus on what truly matters. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the pressure of balancing career success with personal and family commitments, well, today's conversation will provide you with both inspiration and practical tools to create a more intentional, balanced life. Tiffany Sauder on the Leadovation podcast. So Tiffany, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for your work that you do. And I think I wanted to start off by a real example that literally just happened that came into my existence. I was coaching this very successful professional who was doing work in her profession that had been a dream. She's always wanted to do this. It's impactful. She's making a big difference in the world. And yet she's stressed out and she's completely kind of flipped out by the fact that she doesn't have any work-life balance. And we spent a lot of time talking about how to set her intentions and creating ritual in her life to be able to bring the best of herself into all these things. And so you've mentioned in your website, I think you've mentioned in your podcast that you have this idea about an unbalanced character. And I guess if you could explain what that means and how do we know what our unbalanced character is, and probably, to name it, call it out. But of course, more importantly, how do we stop doing some of those self-sabotaging things that keep us from being balanced?
Totally. Let me give you kind of a 90-second backdrop to how I got to needing this in my own life. I own an agency and spent the last 20 years of my life growing and scaling that. My husband has a great big job and travels 20 to 40% of the time. And then we have 4 girls that are quite spread apart. I had one in my 20s, 2 in my 30s, and 1 at 40, which is, I would say, a do not recommend experience, but here we are. So, we're forced with this reality of our choices that required us to scale our professional lives at the same time our family was scaling and growing. And I had to figure out, how do I scale my capacity to be able to run all of these different areas of my life? What I found is when I got unbalanced, I kind of got pissy and I kind of turned into this version of myself that I was like, this is not really who I am, how I want the people and things around me to experience me. And so I've created this model to help me stay inside of my balanced life of and. So imagine a Venn diagram. I'll kind of walk you through this, where there's three circles. One is your career or your professional pursuit. Sometimes that's not always in a for-profit way, but your career is one circle. Your self is one circle. That's something that has to be managed, tended to, your friendships, your health. And then the third circle is your family. Those people who live closest to you, kind of your tier one relationships that you want to manage, groom, those are sustaining and life-giving to you. So picture a Venn diagram where those three circles and there's this area in the center where all three of them overlap. And I call that our balanced life of and, where we're living in a space where our priorities and our values that have been defined in each one of those circles are being served to an intensity in the context of one another. None of these circles can live by themselves, that we're living in that space. So the question is, what happens when we're not there? Where are we instead? Well, one place that we can find ourselves is that we're living just in that little area that overlaps where our family and our career are being served. We're doing all the things external to us. This is where I often find myself. And I call that area your grumpy servant, where all my stuff for my family is getting done. Everybody's lunch is packed. The laundry is done. The house has been done. I got, made a casserole for Thanksgiving or whatever needed to happen. And all of my work stuff is done. And I'm serving everything external. But in the process of that, I've let go of that third circle, which is I've let go of the things I need to do to maintain my own space and time for myself and for my health. So I fall into this grumpy servant. And every time my husband wants to go work out, want to murder the guy. Has nothing to do with the fact that I'm mad he's working out. Has everything to do with the fact that I'm mad he has time for himself, and I'm mad at myself for not making time for myself. And so I'm mad at him for the thing I didn't do for me. And so we fight. It's stupid. So that's one unbalanced character. Do you want to say something?
I do, because it's just bringing up obviously some old memories in my life as well. So why do we often put ourselves last? Why do we set up this scenario? I mean, I can think of a lot of reasons for that, but it's a pattern. I can see it myself. I see it in other people. Why is that part of the Venn diagram, the self diagram, often the one that doesn't get the attention it needs?
Well, I think we all have one area that is harder for us to maintain hold of. And I think for a lot of us, it's ourself. We have a hard time with that. Let me finish the other two unbalanced characters, then I want to come back to your question, if that's okay. Can we do that? The second spot, because I think, we'll get back to that. The second one is those who are most naturally service themselves and their careers. That's where they find themselves. If they don't work really hard to keep hold of all three circles, they find themselves here. And I call that the lonely achiever. This is where the family circle is harder for them to access. My husband can find himself here. If he's been gone 40% of a month, there's a bunch of stuff that's happened inside of our family. There's a lot of discipline and conversations and, friend issues and all the things that happen inside of court. And so if he comes home and I'm not thoughtful about helping him connect into the family, he can be kind of hanging out in this space where he's kind of this lonely achiever. He's out in the world, he's traveling, he's tired, and it gets kind of lonely out there. And if I don't think about it that way, I can say, you've been able to eat whatever you wanted to. Somebody made your bed every morning. You know what I mean? You can sort of be like, congratulations, you get to live it. But that can be a really tough place to live. The third unbalanced character is the fearful loyalist. And these are those people who most naturally service themselves and their family, but have much more fear and trepidation when it comes with pushing into the career or some external pursuit. I have some stay-at-home mom friends that kind of can get stuck here once their kids have moved on, they're driving, their kind of lives are more dynamic, and they're like, I don't know where to start. I know how to take care of myself. I'm really good at taking care of my family. But when it comes to thinking about stepping out and finding a job, whether it's part-time or starting this idea I've had forever or beginning to counsel, whatever it looks like, they're like, and they clam up and they get stuck in this kind of fearful loyalist spot. So there's not a worse place to be. The thing I want to draw attention to is that I think all of us have one of these circles that is harder for us to access. And when we have vocabulary around, hey, I am falling into my unbalanced life character, I'm falling into the grumpy servant. My husband can say, hey, grumpy servant's at the party right now.
Hmm.
You know, that means you're not making time for yourself. How can I help you access that circle? How can I make you, hey, let the girls and I clean up dinner. You need to go for a run. Let me take our daughter to swim practice tomorrow morning so that you can get, you can go on you can go to the gym in the morning. Hey, why don't you over lunch? So he can help me access that, because it will forever be the circle that is the hardest for me to maintain hold of. I have to fight so hard for it. And we can go back to your question of why, I think, in just a minute. But the family one, he wants to be a great dad. He wants to be present for us. It has nothing to do with his desire to not want to access the family. It's just harder because he's gone a lot.
Yeah.
And if I don't say, hey, how do I create routines in our family? Like when my husband comes back from a trip, either the first or second night that he's home, we always have a family dinner. That may mean that it's 8:00 p.m. That might mean somebody can't go to a friend's house and study. That might mean we have to say no to something else. But this is an important part of me helping him access the family circle so that he can stay inside of his life of and. So the vocabulary of it for me helps us say, how do I now actively manage staying out of the space so that when I'm a grumpy servant, I can have agency over that. I can not be pissed at my family for needing to eat and not be pissed at my inbox for having emails in it, but say, this just means I've let go of what I need for myself. What would you say you fall into, Dean? Who is your unbalanced character? Where do you fall into?
Boy, I was thinking about that as you were talking, Tiffany, because that sometimes I can relate to your husband's situation, like with travel. This
Mm-hmm.
last few weeks, months, there's been a lot of travel, but my wife and I do spend some concerted energy to be able to reground, go
Mm-hmm.
out and have dinner, bring family and friends over. But that does happen, and if it keeps going on, I can sort of feel sort of distant, even though career
Mm-hmm.
is going really well, self is going pretty well. I think it shifts for me. At other
Mm-hmm.
times I might go, I haven't been to pickleball in 2 weeks, or I haven't been to tennis, or I haven't hiked, I haven't run, I haven't done something just for Dean, and for a long period of time back down, and when we lived in Phoenix, I used to go to karate 3 times a week. That was Dean's time. That was something that I did for myself. So I think it
Mm-hmm.
shifts. It's not
For
just
sure.
one or the other. But I have to say, career has always been one that is easy to access and
Mm-hmm.
easy to spend time on and energy on. I'm just sort of thrown into that
Mm-hmm.
because I enjoy it. I love it. It's stuff like this. This
Mm-hmm.
is
A
what
natural
I get a lot of
prioritization.
juice from, right? So I enjoy that. But probably the other two is where I need to spend more time on. But the career piece is almost a given.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's right. I've heard from others that, hey, I've lived kind of in each one of these kind of duo spots before, and I might jump. I think the other thing that's interesting to look at is if we're only in one circle. So let's say you only live in self, that's narcissistic.
Right.
If you only live in career, that's a workaholic. And if you only live in family, that's codependence. Oftentimes, that's how that looks. So, again, to me, understanding the model, I'm like, okay, the healthiest place to live on this diagram is in the center. How do I fight and put systems in place to help me stay there? One of the things you said, like, how do we not compromise ourselves every single time? One of the things that has worked the best for me is setting minimums instead of goals for my own self-care, health, exercise, maintenance, etc. So on my worst week, when all my kids are sick, my husband is traveling, and I stub my toe, what can I get done so that I have something to catch me when everything falls apart, instead of saying, I can't do anything this week? So then everything falls apart and you're kind of left to rebuild from, kind of chaos to like, what do I reestablish from? So establishing minimums for what I eat, how often I'm going to work out, how often I'm going to see my friends, my husband and I's date night relationship, those minimums are all defined. So again, I know what's going to catch me when everything falls apart. I get distracted and busy, and I have set traps so that those things don't fall off of my calendar.
It's almost like a non-negotiable.
Totally. And
Yeah.
like I
Okay.
will do anything to make those happen. So my exercise, it's lifting 2 days a week. What in the world? That was so weird. It's lifting 2 days a week for 50 minutes, 50 weeks a year. That is my minimum. And I've hired a trainer. I've set a trap so that happens, and it's like it's just what it has to be. At this point, could I probably get there on my own? Probably, but this makes it so that it happens every single time.
So by setting those minimums, is it because when we set goals, we disappoint ourselves in getting them and that they're outside of our reach? I know this is just a linguistic label and almost like a language hack that keeps us moving forward. But why minimum and not just, hey, I got a goal?
Well, I think there's behavior that moves us towards our goal. The speed at which that goal can be achieved is different based on the environment it has to live in, at least in my life. So, like, for example, after I have a baby, I want to lose. You've not had this amazing experience, but also
Sorry.
some of it's really hard. When I have a baby, I want to lose every single ounce that I gained in like 6 minutes. It's like, it's just going to take some time.
Mm.
I don't have the ability to go biggest loser style and say, hey, this is going to take every ounce of my waking energy to do this. It's not possible. It has to coexist against a lot of every other things. I don't actually get to control how quickly my body loses weight. So for me to set a goal of I want my weight to be this certain number is helpful. And maybe my plan is to work out 4 days a week, but my minimum is 2. If things get disrupted, if my husband gets called out of town, if there's a snowstorm that goes through and the kids don't go to school, like because there's so many variables that I'm navigating in this crazy life of all these kids and all these jobs and all this stuff. If I don't have a minimum to catch me, I throw it out the window and say, I'll start next week.
Mm.
And I think that framework keeps achievers from going all the way to a standstill instead of saying this is the minimum I've picked, and I can always go back to my plan. But my plan can't always be executed in the variables environment that it needs to live in because things happen. But I have something to catch me that still makes me know I have made progress towards where I'm going. And that's important because when we do that every single week, we get our goals to happen.
So going back to the first question that we started off this conversation with is why do we get out of balance or why do we get out of this alignment? I was thinking about a quote. I don't know, maybe it was Tom Peters years and years ago that we all have something to prove. Could be to our father, our mother, or whatever, ourselves. And that the pursuit of that thing in which you're trying to prove can sometimes be at the expense of something else. So, what's your take on? I mean, all of what you said sounds so absolutely right on and intuitively perfectly acceptable. That's where our highest and best would certainly live by that confluence of those three different circles you just described. Why is it so hard to just live that way? Why do we need to be so intentional about it? What's sort of the inner saboteur, the subconscious that gets in the way of balancing or living in these other circles?
I think I can just speak from my own experience on this because I don't know that I'm an expert. I think you're onto something in this like saboteur of I know I have let my ego make decisions for me instead of my priorities, and needing to feel needed and being invited to a important board or something that feels like it's going to make me sort of elevate my relevance. I think I've said yes to those things sometimes when they were not aligned with really where I was going, what my family needed from me, because it just felt cool. Um, my biggest antidote to that has been this maniacal management of my priorities. And I would say I've always had some general directional priorities in my life, but I've gotten to the place where those are really very specific. And also ask my family each quarter what their priorities are.
Hmm.
Because as the mom, and I kind of think of myself as like the CEO of our household, my job is to be an agent for their priorities to move forward too. And so having a broader scope of understanding of what is going to be required of my time, of my resources, and how do I get really strategic about that has helped me know what to say yes and no to in a way that I think is more closely defined to what I want out of my life, and not um, sometimes getting into a reactive state by saying yes to things that other people wanted out of my life and time.
I like the fact that you used a business term to define a personal role. And if you were to flip that upside down and go the other way, imagine a company being run the way in which we normally run our families. It would be much
Mhm.
more haphazard, very iterative, maybe without a real focus, very reactionary to some
Mhm.
degree. But what you're doing is you're putting a system into place. You're putting a
Totally.
system that probably comes from a paradigm around how we have systems within companies. You mentioned the word CEO, COO to run your family life and so forth. And so, can you give us some more, examples of what that looks like? If I were to say, I'm listening to this and I go, all right, I want to be the COO or CEO of my family. What other things can I do to be able to create that kind of consistent, harmonious focus that you have developed?
Yeah, my observation was a couple of things. About 5, 6 years ago, I started to realize, man, I spend a lot of time in my personal life on the most ordinary, mundane things possible. Putting groceries in the refrigerator, folding socks, picking up the house, vacuuming. Like, I was like, this is all I'm doing is managing the decision, like managing the stuff around the people and things I have. I'm not, I don't have the courage to dream about anything else. I don't have any creativity for projects. I don't have, like, I'm just managing a bunch of stuff and I'm reacting all the time. It's like somehow I'm surprised that we have to eat dinner every day. How can this be the case? And I started to look at, in my business, for everything ordinary, it has to be simple. Sending out an invoice has to be simple. Doing annual reviews has to be simple. Um, Cutting checks for payroll has to be simple. These things happen on systems that happen almost automatically, so that we can spend our intellectual capacity and creativity and on things that are innovative and interesting and strategic and new. Like, that's what I'm doing in my professional life. Why can't I do that in my personal life? And so I started to say, everything that is ordinary, I'm going to get to run on a system. And then all I have to do is manage the system. I don't have to schedule. Like, I'll give you a silly example. We have a bunch of people in our house. And so things break. Somebody steps on the, curtain and the curtain rod falls down. The toilet paper holder falls off. Somebody like opens the door really hard and it goes through the back of the drywall. Like, stuff happens just from normal wear and tear. So, like, instead of me being, first of all, either just annoyed that something's always broken or loose or whatever, or hiring a handyman every single time something breaks, which is annoying because then it's like, $84 for them to come out, and I have to be home and just all the stuff. I'm like, I'm going to put this on a system quarterly. I'm going to find someone that I trust. I am going to schedule them to come out quarterly, and I'm going to have a note on my phone that just says handyman. And every time I'm sitting in the, you know, kids' room, I'm sitting on the couch, I'm walking through the house, I'm getting ready for company, and I see something that is not to my liking, I'm going to add it to my list. And then I know it's not going to be broken for more than 90 days because I have a handyman who calls me at 90 days and says, hey, you're ready for your thing. And I send him my list and he goes through it like a punch list, like a contractor would at the end of a project, and he fixes everything. He refills my um, water softener water, he changes my furnace filter, and it just gets taken care of. I don't have to schedule it, pay it, think about it. It's a him job to call me every 90 days. That's an example of taking something that would have taken me 18,000 phone calls, 16 invoices to pay, and 300 days of irritation, and just said, this is just how this is going to work,
I love it.
as
I
an
love it. I
example.
want the name of your guy though.
Oh, he's a 10. His name is James. My
Okay,
my
yeah.
note is actually called
Does he
James.
make house calls across the country?
Yeah, totally. He's amazing. But
Well,
find
that's a
somebody
great idea. It really is. I
Everybody
think
has
everybody can
somebody.
relate to that.
Make it easy. My
Yeah.
husband doesn't want to do it. I don't want to manage him to
Yeah.
update the things. If there's
Right.
pictures that need to be hung or whatever happened, it's never
Right.
broken for more than 90 days,
Yeah. Something
as an
else you
example.
mentioned in your work around a decision framework, and I'm curious about that. I would want to know, how do you make decisions as a family? Are there some decisions that are left to the parents? How much autonomy in the decision making process do you afford? Is it consensus? Is it majority rules? Is it subject matter expert? I get decision making frameworks up and down and through and every which way when it comes to work. I can't necessarily say that I've done. We have one child who's since moved out and he's now, an adult, but I can't necessarily say that we had a really strong decision making framework. So, what's your process when it comes to that? When it comes to your family?
Yeah, I think there's a couple places it can apply. One is, so our kids are ages 15 to 4 right now, and we do. It usually actually ends up being about 3 times a year, but I have them write down and publish their priorities, and we sit down as a family and we talk to one another. Is this going to be a season of travel for their dad? Do I have any conferences coming up? Do I have any new projects? Like, what is everybody's priorities?
Hmm.
My second one is going into her travel volleyball season. And so she wants to add some additional training into that. Is that something that we can make happen as a family? Like, teaching them to have their voice, that it matters to the family, an articulation of what do you want out of the next 3 to 4 months of your life? What are we focusing on? And then I know what to facilitate as the mom too, because I think sometimes we don't ask our families what is important to you, and so we chase everything. I remember I used to almost kill myself being home in the morning so that I was there. I was always there when the kids got on the bus, and that my nanny wasn't there in the morning. And my girls, like 3 years ago, were like, "We literally don't care, mom. We see you for like 6 minutes." I'm like, "You don't care if I'm there in the morning?" I thought it was like this sort of like certainty of send off and one last hug from mom and like, a
Hmm.
high five for the outside world. And they were like, "We literally don't care." I was like, "Are you kidding me?" They're like, "We would so much rather you be home earlier, like go take a coffee breakfast or meet somebody, but we don't really care." I was like, "Well, that's helpful, but we don't ask our families, we don't ask our kids, what do you want from me and what is important to you?" Even my 9-year-old will say, "I want to have, 3 play dates with my cousin." Amazing. Then I know what to manage. So when it comes to decision making as a family, we have the context of one another's priorities, and they have mine too.
Hmm.
What am I working on? What is important to me? What will some things I need to say no to, that I can't be there for you on that thing because this is one of my priorities right now? So, I try to know with my kids kind of this triage of like what's most important versus like it'd be great if you were there, but you don't have to be, mom. But I'm not at everything every time because I have my priorities too. And so I think when they know that, um, there just becomes a lot more teamwork and decision making.
So, when they know your own priorities and that becomes part of their normal conversation with you and your husband, when you have to say, no, I can't meet your priority, do you find less resistance, less pushback, because they've been sort of socialized into realizing that they're not the center of the universe? They're part of a universe of others who occupy space and have purpose and priorities as well. Have you found that to be easier, or have you heard from people you've worked with that when you hear the parents' priorities alongside the children's, when you have to say no to the children, they absorb it, they respond to it better? Not
A
necessarily you
hundred
don't have a temper
percent.
tantrum, but
100% they respond to it better. And they also see themselves of being an agent for your thing being able to happen. So like,
they feel like they are an agent for what you want.
yes. So like, for example, my one of my daughters loves it when I'm the one to wake her up in the morning. If I go exercise, the where my gym is, I can't get back in time to wake her up to get on the bus. And so oftentimes her older sister will wake her up. And so she used to be like, "I don't like it when my sister wakes me up." And I said, "Well, let me explain to you why.
Hmm.
I want to live to be 102 years old. My girls all know this. One of the ways that I do that is by taking care of myself. And so I want to be here for you as long as possible. And so you know that I always work out at least 2 days a week. So on those 2 days, I can't be back in time, but your sister can wake you up. What makes you not feel like it's fun when your sister wakes you up? Like, well, she turned the lights on. I was like, okay, well, could she not turn the light on or whatever? Or it's like, what if your older sister helps you pick your outfit out? Because it's very cool when your teenage sister helps you pick out your outfit. She's like, oh, that would be cool. So it's just like solving the next thing. It's like, honey, when you're willing to let your sister wake you up, which I know is not your favorite, and this is a silly example, but these are the kinds of things where we can feel like we need to always be there. It's like, I don't need to be. You're totally fine. And I'm like, this helps me live to be 102 so that I can be healthy for you, so that I can wake you up for years to come. And she's like, okay, I get it. And it's not a thing anymore.
Hmm.
So it's silly, but I think these are the micro moments where we feel like we've got to be there all the time. And yes, I want to be there for my kids, but it's not the only thing going on in my life. And I want them to know that, because there will be a day likely that they're a mom, and I want them to still feel like they're feeding their dreams, they're feeding themselves, they're putting good into the world, and that their family is supporting that.
I couldn't help but just make this connection. I see, and you see it, I'm sure a lot of people see the drama, the dysfunction at work between people, between management and employees. There's frustrations, there's conflict, there's lack of communication, decision making seems to be non-existent. And as I sit back and I think about what you just said, well, where did they learn it? Where did they learn how to be in
Mm-hmm.
social situations?
Mm-hmm.
At home when they were
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And this is probably a reflection of what they were experiencing when they were 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9.
Mm-hmm.
Now we get to see those same sort of behaviors get played out at work, and we
Yeah.
wonder why our dysfunctional companies are having such a hard time. Well, maybe we had dysfunctional families. Maybe we
Mm-hmm.
didn't teach them how to be in relationship to each other because it didn't happen at work. It didn't happen at home. There was a
Mm-hmm.
period of time when I was the board chair for this really great organization called Workshop for Youth and Families. And the idea was to be able to teach leadership skills to kids between 9 and 19. And I thought, thank God, because I'm dealing with the older version of those 9 and 19-year-olds when they're 29 to 69, right? And I'm thinking like, well, let's get them early. Let's start
Mm-hmm.
working with them before they become habitual, um, you know, dysfunctional people when they get older. But I just sort of all of a sudden made the connection
Yeah.
between, in a way, maybe your focus is around the family and around the personal life, and that's what you're about. But you are planting seeds for good executive team behavior.
I think
Drop the
that's
mic.
right. I think that's right. I totally think that's right, for sure.
That's great. Well, Tiffany, this is really great stuff. How can people learn more about you, your company, and just all things having to do with your process?
Yeah. So if you're interested in, figuring out how to become the CEO of your household, I have a digital course called the Life of And Academy, and it will teach you that in 6 weeks. And we can, I'm sure, put a link in show notes for you for that.
Yeah.
And I also have a podcast called Scared Confident, where weekly we drop tools, resources, and encouragement for busy working families. And certainly give you a pat on the butt and tell you you're doing it great, and then share some really, really practical things like have a handyman come to your house quarterly and just don't make it hard. Some really practical ways that we keep refining and putting systems in place in the most ordinary spaces in our life.
One last question. I could see or think that there's a person who has a family, one child, five children, married or not, with a partner or not, and realize, my gosh, my house is just absolutely a shambles. We don't have any of this stuff going on. The kids are ruling the roost. I feel like I'm constantly serving them. They're not really taking into account what I want. We have fights. There's drama. And this sounds great, Tiffany. I really respect what you're doing. It would be so much easier to start this just right out of the chute. Baby's born. We're setting the systems in place right at the beginning. Is it possible to undo maybe years of family behavior to create the system that you're espousing?
It totally is. I mean, we did not start on this. It came from a place of necessity where I was like, I have to quit my job, I had to sell my company, or I've got to figure this out. Like, it's unsustainable.
Hmm.
I was at an unsustainable place personally. My marriage was at an unsustainable place. I started to hate all the things I once loved. And so it came from a place of, I have to be able to level up my toolbox in the way that I lead and manage our home, the communication, what we're doing, how we're deciding this finite allocation of time. And I was like, I knew how to do that in my business. And so it came iteratively. I teach you in 6 weeks, but it may take you 16 months to implement it. And that's okay. Change takes time. But I would tell you, when you sit down and authentically, vulnerably ask everybody in your house, what's important to you? What are your priorities? Because this system is about helping everybody get what they want. It's not about me serving everybody's needs. It's not about me not being a customer. It's about everybody getting more of what they want out of our family. And so, starting from that pretense, you start to say, let's try one thing. And I would say 100% of the people listening make laundry, have laundry. Look at outsourcing your laundry. Take it to a laundromat. There's a system called a national service called Poplin. We can provide a link. I've got the ultimate guide to outsourcing laundry. Nobody has enough time. For my family of 6, laundry every week takes 8 to 10 hours. Wow. If you're looking for time, stop doing your laundry, outsource it, and put that time towards your family, your relationships, implementing this system. This is the number one way I can say there's an exchange of time, because I know time is finite.
So, okay, I have to ask another question, even though I thought we were finished here. But with the laundry thing, I remember in our family, laundry was one of those chores that we thought we were teaching our son responsibility and autonomy and so forth, right? If you wanted to go to school, dress nicely, you better do your laundry. Is that a valid case, or are you still feeling like the benefits are so greater to outsource it?
Well, I outsource our laundry, and my girls know how to do laundry. I don't think my girls have to they don't have to have done every load of laundry to know how to do laundry.
Okay.
It's just a battle. I'm not willing to, we get it done. It comes back and it's done, because it gives me time. I don't want to manage that function in our family.
Yeah.
And they are very involved, and my husband and I are very involved, and nobody's ever home. And so they will go to college and they will know how to do laundry. But here's also what I'll say, Dean, is for a single person who makes $40,000 a year, you can afford to outsource your laundry. It's not expensive. Really? People think it's like you have to be the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to be able to have somebody do your laundry. No. Poplin, it's $1 a pound. A white trash bag, like kitchen trash bag, filled to the frickin' brim, $20 a week.
Wow.
It's accessible. We are not used to thinking about that in our personal lives. We think about I haven't sent an invoice in 17 years at my agency. I haven't, there's 1,000 things I haven't done because it would be silly.
Right.
And we are making $300,000 a year still folding your socks. And I'm just like, you got to stop.
I keep thinking about, when it comes to on the business side of things, we always talk about what's your highest and best use of your time, and everything else, see if you can outsource it or give it to somebody else. Laundry might be a great example of that on the personal side.
Yeah, we're folding our laundry and cleaning our toilets, and we've got shitty marriages and a really unhealthy society. Yeah. I'd like people to think about exchanging those things.
We talked about before we started this conversation that I've really been fascinated by blue zones and the whole lifestyle, and being able to include that into almost like a medical practice and get upstream of disease, get upstream of the cold, make sure that we take accountability and we have a process to be able to do that. But as you look at a lot of it, it's very much individualistic. It's individual about what they can do to be able to live a more balanced lifestyle for themselves. But what you're talking about is really kind of, it's in the same area, but really it's about the dynamics on a family level and what happens at home, which I think is also a lifestyle lesson that can actually create so many different ripple effects downstream. I really appreciate your work. This has been a delight. Thank you so much for your time and all your energy on this.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate you having me.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newlund. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadovation.